The locksmith arrived before the funeral flowers even wilted. That's how I knew. Not from anything my husband said. From the sound of a drill biting into my own front door while I stood in the driveway holding a casserole dish someone had handed me at his father's wake 3 hours earlier. My name is Denise Calloway. I'm 47, and for 4 years I was the only person on this earth who knew how to get my father-in-law, Walter, through a single afternoon without terror closing in on him. Walter had vascular dementia. It doesn't erase you all at once like people think. It erases you in patches, a flooded field where some ground stays dry and some disappears completely. I learned the dry patches. I learned that if I hummed the hymn from his wedding, his hands would stop shaking. I learned that 4:15 in the afternoon was always his worst hour. The hour he'd ask for his late wife, and I'd have to decide, gently, how much truth a frightened old man could hold that day. My husband, Preston, learned none of this. Preston learned the inside of airports. I gave up my physical therapy practice the year Walter moved in. Preston said it made sense, said my schedule was more flexible than his, said it was temporary until we found the right place for him. 3 years passed, and the right place never got found because I was cheaper than any place, and free labor doesn't show up on anyone's spreadsheet as a cost. Preston climbed at his firm the whole time I was climbing stairs with a shower chair. He made partner the same month. Walter forgot my name for an entire week and called me nurse instead. I didn't correct him. It didn't feel worth the fight some days, correcting a dying man's grammar. I want to tell you about the morning I should have seen everything coming, because it explains the drill in the door later. 6 weeks before Walter died, he had one of those mornings dementia sometimes grants like a strange mercy, where the fog thins out completely and the person you married into comes back whole for an hour. I was clipping his nails at the kitchen table when he suddenly gripped my wrist, harder than I thought his hands still could. "Denise," he said, and there was no fog in it at all. "You need to hear this while I can still say it right." I set the clippers down. He told me he'd watched his son for 3 years, watched him kiss my cheek at the door in the morning and disappear for 11 days at a stretch. Watched him come home smelling like a hotel gym instead of his own office. "He thinks devotion is something you're owed for free," Walter said. "Don't let him teach you that's true." Then, within the hour, he was asking me if his wife had finished the ironing. A woman, 22 years in her grave. I filed the moment away as one more strange, sad flicker. I had no idea he'd already spent 8 months meeting privately with an estate attorney named Priya Nandakumar, restructuring everything he owned in complete secrecy. The last 2 weeks of his life, Preston's absences turned into something sharper. His phone, which used to sit face up on the counter, started living in his blazer pocket, buzzing against his ribs at dinner. A name kept surfacing on the lock screen: Bianca. Someone from his firm's Chicago office I'd met once, at a holiday party, who'd held eye contact with me a half-second too long, like she already knew something I didn't, I noticed. I said nothing. I was turning an old man in a hospital bed every 2 hours, so his skin wouldn't break down. Suspicion is a luxury item, and I didn't have room in my arms to carry it alongside everything else. Walter died on a Thursday at 4:15 in the afternoon, the exact hour that had always frightened him most. Except this time, he wasn't frightened at all. His breathing simply went quiet, my hand around his the way it had been for 4 years of afternoons. Preston walked in 50 minutes after I called him, smelling faintly of a restaurant receipt I later found for a table of 2. He looked at his father's body the way you'd look at a delayed flight. Inconvenienced, not devastated. I told myself grief wears strange faces. Some part of me had already started keeping a private ledger, though, and that moment went straight into it. The funeral was small and quiet, the way Walter would have wanted it. Preston gave a eulogy that sounded rehearsed in a hotel mirror. Afterward, while I was still holding a stranger's casserole dish in the driveway, I heard the drill. He was rekeying the locks himself, sweat on his collar, jaw set like a man finishing a chore before it could finish him. "The house is under my name now, Denise," he said, not looking up. "I think it's time we're honest that this arrangement has run its course." I asked what arrangement he meant. He said, "The marriage," he said, standing there with a drill still warm in his hand, that he'd only ever needed me to manage his father, and now that job was done. He told me to be gone by morning. I didn't cry in the driveway. I want you to understand that. Something in me had been quietly building toward this exact sentence for 3 years, and when it finally arrived, it landed less like a blow and more like a door finally swinging open that had been jammed shut for a very long time. I packed one bag. I walked to my sister's apartment 4 blocks away in the dark, and I let the phone in my pocket buzz twice before I even looked at it. A text from a number I didn't know. "Mrs. Calloway, don't sign anything yet. Walter left something only for you." 7 days later, exactly 7, the same number called. A woman introduced herself as Priya Nanda Kumar, Walter's estate attorney. She said she'd been instructed to wait precisely 1 week after the funeral before reaching out, and that there were things about Walter's affairs I needed to know before I let Preston's version of events settle into fact. She asked me to meet her the following morning. I barely slept. What Priya told me over coffee the next day rearranged everything. 8 months before his death, while fully lucid and independently evaluated by 2 separate physicians for competency, Walter had dissolved the will Preston believed still governed the estate and replaced it with an irrevocable trust. The house, the property, the modest but real investment accounts, all of it transferred not to his son, but explicitly and by name to whoever had served as his primary caregiver at the time of his death. Rachel Ann No. Denise Marie Calloway, my name, typed in black and white, notarized, witnessed, sealed. 2 black SUVs pulled up outside the house that same afternoon, while Preston was still inside changing the locks on a home that had already stopped being his 8 months earlier without his knowledge. Priya walked up the front path with a folder under her arm and the calm of someone who has delivered this exact news many times before. Preston came out onto the porch furious, certain there'd been some clerical mistake, certain no judge alive would honor it. Priya opened her folder and read the operative clause aloud once, evenly, without theater. The caregiver was named specifically. He had 48 hours to vacate. He called me that night, voice smaller than I'd ever heard it, asking how I could have let this happen behind his back. I told him the truth. His father did this, not me. I only showed up, every single day, for 4 years, while he was somewhere else entirely. 3 days after that, Priya delivered one more item, a sealed envelope Walter had written in one of his last clear hours, with instructions that it reach me only once the estate was fully settled. I read it alone at the kitchen table where I'd fed him 1,000 small spoonfuls of soup. His handwriting was shaky but certain. He wrote that he'd watched his son mistake my exhaustion for endless supply, and that he refused to let that mistake go uncorrected simply because he wouldn't live to correct it himself. Near the bottom, in smaller, more deliberate letters, he'd written, "You stopped being my son's wife the day you became the only family I had left." I teach physical therapy again now, 3 mornings a week at a clinic 2 blocks from that same kitchen. I met a widower named Marcus through a mutual patient, a quiet man who shows up with his own toolbox and fixes what's broken without being asked twice. Preston still drives past the house sometimes, slower than he needs to. He never gets out. Last month, I watched him idle at the curb for almost a full minute before pulling away for good. I think about Walter most in the quiet hour of 4:15, which doesn't frighten me anymore either. I think about his hand gripping mine, telling me not to let anyone teach me that devotion is free. For 4 years, I believed love meant disappearing into someone else's needs until there was nothing left of me to notice. It doesn't. Love is being seen while you're still standing there, not just remembered once you've already gone. Tell me where in the world you're watching this from tonight, and what you'd have done in Denise's place. There are so many more stories like hers waiting to be told, So subscribe if you want to hear the next one.